You mentioned not a lot of people who would want to take on this challenge, so to speak. And you've come from an IT SaaS background. There are many problem statements that
Yeah.
a lot of visionary people and very intelligent people have solved in a very um, simple and effective way. Why do you think something like ecology and conservation, which is who we are as people and as a civilization, has less of a demand, so to speak? Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think that's the journey I'm sort of on. I don't
Mm,
think I'm an expert with a perception on why it is, but here's what I've learned so far. I think there are many people who are doing it, and uh, at the core of it, it's how the value is perceived and the noise that value makes is what I've realized so far. Let me give you an example. A startup's value is through the profit it makes or the customers it has. And a simple Google will tell us 100,000 formulas to interpret a KPI a startup is bringing. And there are many theories behind valuation and stuff. And when you think about this, this is from a time scale, this is fairly new and it's evolved, but it's almost very repeatable. You and I have seen our own company sort of go through the evolution of KPI, but then it was not frankly new every year. It didn't change. It probably changed quarter on quarter, but then at the end of the day, it was still the same MRR, ARR, number of customers, and the
very, very
expansion.
fundamental.
Very fundamental, correct? Yeah. But I've realized that nature as a whole is so vague that many people have tried building narratives in many different ways. So if you go to a climate tech startup, their version of value is perceived very differently than an agriculture startup or a UNESCO or a government agency. And also the local tribals themselves have had perceived the value of the land for a time immemorial. So I think one aspect of it is, not to sound too controversial, capitalism hasn't entered nature yet. People are greedy to cut down trees to build land. But once they understand the true value of what the ecosystem could provide, and we are beginning to see in the last 10 years, the whole carbon and the narrative about carbon is taking a different tangent. And a
Good
lot of
point.
people are
Good
doing
point.
good, interesting points. So, in a way, I think it's so diversified and in silos that every time I meet with somebody who's doing it, they've done exceptional work. But they're not beating their chest out in saying it. And even if they are saying it, they are saying it in such a complex white paperish way that it loses interest towards the audience. Right.
Interesting.
And our, at least my thought process here and the vision for Mycelium is what could we do to simplify this? Not that solve it, but simplify it. Solution is a community driven problem, but solution to this could be accessibility. India is a great example. I've been to Australia and it's so out in the open and a lot of people like to spend a lot of time in the outback. And there are people, my personal favorite is Steve Irvine, and I've seen him growing up. I've seen the enthusiasm he's got. And in India, there are many people who are doing this in silos. I've met with some exceptional minds who can tell stories and wove it through nature and make it sound like you're insignificant in front of it. And it's so beautiful. But they understand the true value that they don't advertise it. There is no need to go out there to make money because that's when you send it to mass. So our what we are trying to do at Mycelium is also walk the fine line of not making it sound too obnoxious, or in a loss of a better word, capitalist, but at the same time make it a lot more accessible. So we want to talk to kids, we want to help them understand why amphibians are in a certain way. We want ecology clubs to come in to be able to access a piece of land where they can study, and in a sense build a community and see if we can be part of this close net rather than make this close net and worldwide thing. Our goal is not to make it worldwide, but sort of to expand into this close knit community and get as many people inculcated into this as possible. So I believe
Hmm.
that's why not a lot of people know it. Not that they are averse to it, but when they taught the right way, when they observe it the right way, they automatically get initiated into it. It's not rocket science. It's Mother Nature. You go outside, you fall in love with it.
Interesting. So you're walking the fine line between, it's a bit of an oxymoron in a way. You want to bring in the principles of establishing a startup in this particular space, yet you don't want to let it be consumed by the money motive, which could really change the agenda of what you're trying to achieve. So, what would be that problem statement, and how would you set KPIs that would sort of, give you a tap on the shoulder and go, "Hey, Benood, I'm on the right track."
Yeah, yeah. KPIs. I've been trying to think about KPIs in this space.
Yeah, it's a tough one because
It's a
because you and I, we know SaaS, right? You can go CAC, you can go
exactly.
LTV,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can do deal cycle close, you can do anything, right?
Correct,
How would you do it
correct.
here?
Yeah, and there is a today's world, which is a very trying to fit the aspect of KPI. Carbon sequencing is one thing, and a lot of people are obviously thinking about the biomass a particular land can drive, the agriculture output a particular land can provide, and thus, and there are 100 ways you could think about pushing a KPI in. But for us, what we want to be able to do is sort of take a step back and uh, think about what is it that um, uh, our own world is saying. And by our own world, I'm not a saint to say that we want to conserve Earth, we want to solve world hunger problem, but we want to be able to take on the execution aspect of it. We don't want it to be just in theory. So we are identifying depleted biodiverse landscape. We are buying them, and then we are building a lot of this. So in a sense, each of the ecosystem we are investing in yields different set of metrics. It can't be unique. If we
It's
take
really
a,
tangible what you're doing.
exactly, and it's also developing our perception of KPI, because whether we call it KPIs or not, they'll continue to build. They'll continue to grow. We are calling it KPI to interfere, to interpret, and then to see if there is succession in what we are doing. So in a way, what I was trying to say was we want to be able to first build out a space for observational capability. So we think of milestones rather than KPIs. We want to be able to build, one of our milestones is we've got a bunch of these properties in Western Ghats in India. This is a biodiverse landmass. And for us, we want to be able to build a capacity for observation, for anybody to come in and say, I could do X, Y, and Z. This is a problem I want to be able to solve for. Because as a minute land, you could say I could develop this, I could convert this carbon. I have X amount of carbon coming out of here. I have so much agriculture. But we don't want to be talking in a time scale of 3 years. We want to be talking a time scale of what happens in 50 years. Does this particular tree outgrow, build another ecosystem? So many research has already been done. So we want to give the platform. So one of the things we are thinking about the milestone-based KPIs in saying we'll first build observatories, we'll build experiences, we'll build treks for anybody to come in and experience this, learn from it.
Interesting.
And our formula is called observe, interpret, and then evolve. So we first take time to observe, collectively observe it, then collectively interpret what it is, and then evolve, which is the point where metrics could come in, evolution could be circular economy, using the local tribals to help build some stuff, working with nonprofit organizations to do some deforestation. A lot of that is already happening. So we are not claiming that we want to reinvent the wheel, but we want to take time in observing. And I think that is the biggest metric we want to drive is milestone-based KPIs for us to first sit and observe and understand what this is offering, because it's already built. We are just getting into a roadmap which is
and like what you're managing, you want to manage that sort of experience, so to speak. So if someone around the world wants to see how conservation and biodiversity and the influence of us can work together, they can go to mycelium ecology to experience and to interpret that sort of way, isn't it?
Absolutely. And get inspired. Yeah.
Wow. And you mentioned, obviously, I think obviously that we know that obviously nature in general can be sort of overlooked, as you can tell. It's not just seeing a tree or the river on Instagram, right? Why do you think we've placed less of an importance on nature? Like, I know you and I, we've talked about it briefly.
Yeah.
I've given you, I probably seeded the question in you.
Yeah.
Why do you think we're sort of not really cherishing nature, you could argue?
Yeah. I think we cherish it. But I go and take a look at hashtags on Instagram on nature, and people do some wonderful things. There are many people in India who do things also in a beautiful way, bringing out the diversity and stuff. It needs to be a lot more accessible for it to be understood. And the medium, I think human beings have also evolved in so many different ways that the medium of observation and inspiration cannot be taught in a simple white paper, like science journals. I was reading a beautiful scientific paper the other day on mushrooms and the fear of mushrooms. And this
mushrooms, okay.
It's a real thing. It's called mycophobia,
okay.
And mycophilia, which was also termed around the same time for people who love mushrooms. And obviously, mycelium is based off of this beautiful organism. And the reason why I say this is there is this paper which talks about the reason behind people fearing mushroom is actually very cultural, and it's Anglo-Saxon. The Britishers actually were really, most of the 16th, 17th century explosion of biology was driven by scientists from Britain and UK, obviously. And they and the certain group of people termed mushrooms to be just decomposers and toxic. But on the same time scale, you come to Southeast Asia, you come to India, you come to places like Russia. People have been foraging mushrooms and including it in their meal, including it in their religion for time immemorial. So in a way, I think not understanding mushrooms had triggered phobia for so many people. Mycophobia as a term came in the 16th century. So I'm not, I was actually really averse to mushrooms, because in school I was taught that they grow near wastewater and they are decomposers. But now research is pointing out that forests, 95% of the forest covers are filled with mycelium, and they share the nutrients. And there are some brilliant books which have come out which talk about the importance of it. So in a way, what we are doing is also pausing to observe things the right way. Because our interpretation makes or break, I think, the value of what that is perceived.
It's
So
also
like you,
education.
it's also education. It's also pointing kids on the right direction and getting them to perceive it the right way. Right. And if I had, obviously, if I had somebody who told me, no, mushrooms are not just decomposing, that's great. But I had to also evolve. I grew up in a time where access to information like this was not available, or it was limited available, and it was taught to the right people who could afford to do it, not to in tier two, tier three. But majority of our forests today reside in tier two, tier three. They don't reside in cosmopolitan. But majority of the cosmopolitan people dictate what forests should look like. So in a way, there is that imbalance there, and I think that's why importance of nature is lost in this tussle between making cosmopolitan the new urban nature and sort of forgetting what the true nature is all about.
You know, it's funny. I saw an interesting post the other day about Brunei. I think it was Brunei. I can't remember where it was, or Southeast Asia, where 72% of the country is basically populated by natural forests. And I can't remember whether it was some government
Borneo, I think. Borneo,
Borneo,
yeah, if I'm not wrong.
and some government body said, you know, this country only contributes to minimal percentage to world GDP. Shouldn't we cut down the trees in that country so that it can generate more GDP? And I'm like, well, isn't that just the wrong KPI to set? And
Correct.
that, you know, it's just let it be, as
Correct.
opposed to putting a profit motive and that GDP figure, which is sort of so renowned in terms of measuring success.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And if we put in our observational skills, we could derive success out of coexistence. One of the other ethos we have at Mycelium is that, which is we want to understand this to coexist rather than understand this to either make them the main picture. Sorry, I've got dogs. Part of the nature and urban ecosystem is these organisms. But no, but for me, what really stood out, and I think I read from your Twitter feed only, I read this World Bank had mentioned that Borneo or someplace had it. I don't know if you had liked it.
Yeah, we probably saw the same thing.
I think you liked it, and I saw it recently. It's quite interesting because that is the perception, like you said. GDP is considered to be the success towards it. Obviously, monetary value is required, needs to be taught.
It's
We
easier to
can't
measure.
live without it. It's easier to measure, and it's the need of the hour. And it's very easy for you and I to sit here and talk about it when people are still dependent on money for putting the food on the table. And so in a way, what does that coexistence look like? Or what could that be is what we are imagining, and we are hoping we could build our own coexistence theory at Mycelium, because we want to be able to work with nature to evolve. And the human evolution involves monetary aspect. It's just not good oxygen and good water. Good money also needs to come. That's when people get more active. Cycle. It's part of the cycle, and that's when accessibility becomes easier as well, right? It's a vicious circle, but you've got to tread the line the right way. Many people are doing it. There's a lot of inspiration. I've seen so many conservation projects in South America, in South Africa, who are coexisting the right way. Just need to build our own formula, inspire more people to coexist, and hopefully it becomes better and better.
I think it was the late founder of North Face, I believe, or correct me if I'm wrong, or Esprit. He purchased a substantial amount of land near Patagonia, I believe. And he's obviously he's passed away now, and he's utilizing the land for conservation. So I believe that's sort of a similar path about retaining nature so future generations can learn from it in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And learn from it is the right, you said the right way to think about it.